when Samuel found a trembling bobcat kitten in the snow. He thought he'd save her for a night. But Koda, his old husky, saw something more a daughter to protect. Through storms and seasons they grew together, one wild, one gentle, both changed forever. And even as the years passed, the bobcat never left his side, proving that love, once found, doesn't know the bounds of nature. It simply stays. The wind clawed at the windows of the Reed's cabin, howling through the pines like a restless ghost. Samuel Reed, half awake in his chair, thought the sound belonged to the storm until he heard a thin, frantic cry beneath the roar of the wind, too sharp, too alive to be the wind alone. He stepped outside into a world of white silence broken only by that desperate sound. Snow reached his knees, and the lantern's glow barely touched the dark. Behind the old snowmobile lay a small bundle, trembling, its fur crusted with ice. Two amber eyes blinked up at him, wide with fear. Samuel crouched, heart hammering. A bobcat kitten, barely breathing, claws sunk in the frozen ground. The sight of it pulled something deep inside him, memories of hunts long past, of life taken instead of spared. He wrapped the creature in his scarf and whispered, "Easy, little one." And, inside, Mara gasped when she saw what he carried. "Sam, that's a wild cat," she cried, but her hands already reached for a towel. She placed the kitten near the fire, rubbing its paws gently, the smell of pine smoke mixing with the faint scent of fur and fear. The kitten stirred, letting out a hoarse chirp, halfway between a meow and a plea. Its tiny chest shuddered under each breath. Samuel watched, torn between caution and compassion. The wild did not belong inside four walls, yet something told him leaving it outside would kill more than just the animal. Then came the sound of claws clicking on the wood floor. Koda, their aging husky, approached, his silver coat glinting in the firelight. He stopped beside the kitten, ears forward, tail still. Samuel tensed, but the dog only lowered his head and exhaled softly. A breath, like a sigh of acceptance. The bobcat's eyes fluttered open, meeting the husky's ice-blue gaze. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with trembling effort, the kitten crawled forward and pressed its face into Koda's chest fur, as if the warmth there meant safety. The dog didn't flinch. He simply stayed. Mara watched, tears catching the firelight. "Look at that," she whispered. "He thinks Koda's his mother," Samuel grunted, pretending not to care. Yet his hand rested on the back of the chair to steady himself. Something fragile and wordless had begun in that moment. The storm outside grew wilder, snow sweeping across the windows. Inside, the three of them formed a strange circle of life. Two humans who had lost too much, one dog who had once faced death, and a wild kitten that shouldn't have survived. The cabin felt less empty than it had in years. Through the long night, Koda never moved far from the fire. When the kitten whimpered, the husky shifted closer, his thick tail curling around the small body. Ash, that was the name Mara whispered, softly slept for the first time in warmth. Her breath synced with the dog's slow rhythm. Before dawn, Samuel woke to find Koda still guarding the hearth, snow melting from his fur. Ash lifted her tiny head, blinking at the faint light that spilled through the frosted window. The world outside remained cold, merciless, but here, in this fragile warmth, something wild had chosen to trust. And as the first morning sun touched the snow, Samuel realized what unsettled him most wasn't that a bobcat slept beside his dog. It was that, for the first time in years, he felt hope again thin, trembling, but alive, just like the little creature now breathing softly by the fire. Morning light seeped through the cabin window, cutting soft lines across the rug where Ash lay curled. The bobcat kitten stirred, blinking against the brightness. Her body trembled from weakness, but warmth from the fire still clung to her fur like a promise that life had changed overnight. Mara knelt beside her, whispering gently, "Easy, little one." She dipped a finger into warm milk and brushed it across Ash's mouth. The kitten licked, hesitant at first, then with growing need. Her tiny tongue rasped against Mara's skin, a fragile bridge between wild instinct and human care. Across the room, Koda watched, his blue eyes steady, ears twitching with each sound the kitten made. He'd faced wolves, storms, and hunger, but nothing stirred him quite like this trembling scrap of fur. When Mara set the bottle down, Koda padded forward, lowering his head in silent curiosity. Ash froze, her breath quick and shallow. Every instinct screamed danger, yet Koda didn't growl or lunge. He lay down beside her, his body a mountain of calm, his tail sweeping slowly over the floor. The kitten's pupils shrank, the fear inside her cracked just enough for curiosity to slip through. She reached out one small paw and touched his muzzle. His breath fogged against her fur, and she didn't pull away. That single gesture, the smallest spark of trust, lit something deep between them. Mara saw it happen and felt her throat tighten. The wild was learning gentleness. Over the next few days, Ash began to follow sounds she'd never known. The scrape of boots, the creak of wood, the hum of Koda's quiet breathing. Each one became familiar, part of the rhythm of safety. Her wounds healed, and with them, the wall inside her began to crumble. Samuel pretended indifference, grumbling about a wild thing living in my house. But every evening he lingered by the fire longer than before. He'd find himself watching Ash mimic Koda's posture, head tilted, tail flicking awkwardly. "She thinks she's a dog," Mara teased. "She thinks she's family," he muttered back. When Koda went to the door, Ash tried to follow, pressing her nose against the wood, mewing softly. Samuel sighed. "You can't go out there yet, little hunter." But the kitten didn't understand. She only saw her protector stepping into the cold and wanted to go where he went. That night, a storm rolled over the valley again. Thunder cracked, shaking the walls. Koda lifted his head, unbothered, while Ash crouched low, tail puffed, eyes wide. He gave a quiet whine and nudged her closer. The kitten pressed into his fur until the trembling stopped. Mara watched from her chair, knitting forgotten in her lap. She saw the kitten's breathing match the dog's, saw the way Koda shifted just enough to shield her from the flashes of lightning. It wasn't ownership or instinct, it was something older, something she didn't have words for. By dawn, the storm had passed. Snow shimmered blue in the pale morning. Ash climbed clumsily onto Koda's back, tiny claws gripping his thick coat. For the first time, she looked around the cabin as if it were hers too. Samuel chuckled quietly. "Guess she's decided who her father is." In the weeks that followed, Ash grew stronger, bolder, her eyes brighter with each sunrise. The fear that once defined her was fading, replaced by a strange, childlike wonder. She no longer hid from the world. She followed it, step for step, behind the husky, who had become her home. Ash's paws had grown steadier, her steps surer. The once fragile kitten now followed Koda from hearth to doorway, mimicking every tilt of his head. When he stretched, she stretched. When he yawned, she yawned. What began as curiosity had become a quiet devotion that filled the cabin like music. Each morning, Koda trotted to the door, nose lifted to the wind. Ash watched, tail flicking. One day she dared to follow. Samuel cracked the door open, snow glaring outside. "Just for a minute," he warned. Ash stepped out, sinking into white powder. The cold bit her pads, but freedom thrilled her. Koda bounded ahead, his tracks deep and wide. Ash leapt after him, her tiny prints weaving between his. They circled the porch until she stumbled and rolled, a puff of snow exploding around her. Koda barked once, half laugh, half encouragement, and waited for her to rise again. Inside, Mara watched through the window, smiling at the unlikely pair. "She's learning from him," she said softly. Samuel nodded but kept his arms crossed. "Learning or forgetting what she is," he muttered. But even he couldn't look away from the small miracle unfolding in the snow. Ash returned inside, soaked and trembling, yet proud. She shook herself beside Koda, showering the rug with icy flecks. Koda tolerated it with saintly patience. Mara wrapped Ash in a towel, and for the first time, the kitten didn't hiss at being held. She purred a low, rusty sound of belonging. Days became weeks, and Ash's imitation grew bolder. When Koda barked at crows, she chirped. When he dug in the snow, she copied, flinging white clumps behind her. She even tried to wag her short bobbed tail. Samuel laughed despite himself. "That's one confused cat," he said, shaking his head. But one evening, while Koda howled at a siren echoing from the valley, something strange happened. Ash tilted her head back and tried to answer. What came out was a strained yowl, off-key and awkward, but determined. Koda stopped mid-howl, looked at her, and gave a small, approving grunt. From then on, the duet became ritual. Each dusk, when wind moaned through the trees, Koda would howl, and Ash would join in her voice, wilder, sharper, but filled with the same rhythm. The sound startled birds and sometimes made Mara laugh until she cried. The valley had its own choir now. One night, Samuel woke to find Ash curled at Koda's side, one paw draped over his chest. The firelight painted their fur gold and silver. He felt something tighten in his throat. "Guess the wild's not all teeth," he murmured. Mara only smiled. "No," she said. "Sometimes it's love." Outside, the world thawed. Snowmelt whispered through the forest. Koda led Ash farther each day past the fence, through pines where deer scent hung thick. He showed her how to listen, how to crouch, how to move like shadow. Yet she never strayed far from his side, afraid to lose him. One afternoon, a hawk's cry sliced the air. Ash froze, her fur bristling. Koda nudged her shoulder, steady and calm, teaching without words that not every shadow meant danger. She watched him, breathing his courage, until the fear passed. The lesson sank deeper than instinct, it became trust. By spring, Ash had grown sleek and strong, her spots dark against sunlit fur. But beneath her wild grace beat a heart moulded by a husky's patience. She was learning to hunt, to climb, to roar softly at the dawn. Yet every evening she still returned to the porch, back to her father. Spring sunlight spilled through the pines, melting the last of the snow. Ash prowled near the porch, her paws silent over damp earth. She was stronger now, her muscles sleek, her senses alive. The world no longer frightened her, it called to her like an old song she half remembered. Koda watched from the steps, tail flicking lazily. When Ash darted toward a bird in the grass, he barked once, low and warning. She froze, ears flat, then retreated with an irritated chirp. Even wild hearts, it seemed, could learn boundaries. Their days had become a quiet rhythm of trust and restraint. That rhythm shattered when the truck appeared. Its tires crunched over gravel, echoing through the valley. Ash vanished under the porch, eyes glowing from the shadows. Koda growled once, a low rumble that carried through the boards. Samuel wiped his hands and stepped outside to meet the stranger. Deputy Frank Dawson climbed from the cab, a tall man with weathered skin and sharp eyes. "Morning, Mr. Reed," he said. "Mind if I ask a few questions? Folks around here have been spotting a bobcat close to homes." His gaze drifted toward the porch, lingering too long. Mara came to the doorway, hands dusted with flour. "We've got no trouble here," she said, her voice even. But Ash's faint hiss betrayed them. The sound sliced through the silence. Frank's brow furrowed. "You sure about that?" he asked, taking a slow step toward the porch. Koda moved first, placing himself between the deputy and the porch. His fur bristled, but he didn't bark. The air tightened. Frank stopped, hand hovering near his belt. "That dog of yours protective?" he asked. "Only when he needs to be," Samuel replied, his tone cool as steel. Under the porch, Ash trembled. She didn't understand words, only tension, the human scent of authority, the fear pulsing from her humans. Her instincts whispered, "Run," but something stronger kept her rooted, the soft rumble of Koda's breath. Steady, unafraid. Frank exhaled and lowered his hand. "If you see anything unusual, report it. Regulations are regulations." His boots crunched as he turned back to the truck. When the engine roared to life, Ash flinched. Only after it faded did she creep out, small and silent as mist. Samuel crouched beside her. "It's all right," he murmured. Ash pressed against his leg, her body trembling. He hadn't realized how much fear she carried until that moment. Mara placed a hand on his shoulder. "They'll come back," she whispered. He nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That night, rain fell in steady whispers. Ash lay beside Koda, watching the firelight dance on the walls. Every creak of the house made her ears twitch. Koda shifted, resting his muzzle over her shoulders, the weight heavy but comforting. The storm outside couldn't touch her here. At dawn, tire tracks still marked the wet gravel road. Ash padded out to the porch, nose twitching at the lingering scent of the deputy. She didn't understand what he wanted, only that danger had a human smell. Koda joined her, staring down the road, as if daring it to return. The morning breeze stirred the trees, carrying the faint cry of a hawk. Ash looked up, her golden eyes catching the light. Somewhere deep inside, instinct whispered again, "Run, fight, survive." But when she looked at Koda, that voice softened. She had already chosen her world, and it was here. The forest had changed. Spring deepened into a misty green, and the pines whispered with hidden life. Ash prowled at Koda's side, her coat gleaming under the dim light. Each sound, the rustle of squirrels, the hum of bees, called to the wild inside her, the part that remembered mountains and freedom. That memory pulled her farther from the house each morning. Samuel watched from the porch, worry tightening his jaw. "She's getting bolder," he said. Mara smiled faintly. So did Koda, once. Still, Samuel kept the rifle by the door, old habits of protection stirring in his chest. One afternoon, the wind shifted. The forest went still, unnaturally quiet. Koda stopped mid-step, ears pricked. Ash mirrored him, her tail stiff. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a low growl rolled through the trees, deep, guttural, not the voice of any creature she knew. Ash crept forward, curiosity overtaking caution. The smell hit her next musky, sharp, tinged with hunger. Koda barked low, a warning to stay back, but she didn't listen. Her paws carried her to the edge of a clearing where she saw movement, grey fur, yellow eyes, teeth flashing in the gloom. A lone wolf, ribs sharp beneath its coat, stepped into view, its gaze locked on Ash. For one suspended heartbeat, neither moved. Then the wolf lunged, jaws snapping through air. Koda slammed into it from the side, a flash of silver and force, his snarl echoing through the valley. Ash bolted, then stopped. The instinct to flee warred with something new loyalty. She turned back and saw Koda grappling with the larger animal, snow and pine needles flying. Blood streaked the wolf's flank. Koda's cry split the air, raw and fierce, calling her back to courage. With a hiss, Ash leapt from a fallen log and struck at the wolf's muzzle. Claws flashing, it yelped, surprised by the tiny fury on its face. That heartbeat of distraction was enough. Koda twisted free, drove forward, and sent the predator crashing into the underbrush. Silence followed. Breathing hard, Ash stood trembling beside him. The wolf limped away into the dark, leaving the clearing reeking of iron and fear. Koda's fur was torn, his breath ragged, but he licked her head once, as if to say, "You did good, little one." She pressed against him, purring through her shaking. They limped home together, slow and silent. Samuel met them halfway down the path. "Dear God," he whispered, seeing the blood. Koda staggered but stayed upright. Ash didn't leave his side, even as Mara rushed with towels and warm water. The wild and the home had collided, and love had won. That night, the cabin smelled of smoke and medicine. Ash lay curled beside Koda, refusing to rest anywhere else. Samuel stroked her spotted fur and murmured, "Brave girl." Her eyes half closed. She listened to the steady beat of Koda's heart, proof that family could survive anything. When dawn came, the forest felt different. The threat had passed, but its lesson remained. Ash had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was staying beside the one who gave you a reason to fight. Outside, birds sang. Inside, the bond between dog and bobcat had deepened into legend, and from that day forward, whenever the wind rustled through the pines, Ash would lift her head, ears twitching. She no longer feared the sound of the wild. She carried it now, in her breath, her blood, her love for the husky, who had taught her how to survive and how to stay. The scars from the wolf fight had faded, but the memories lingered like shadows. Ash was stronger now, confident and alert. She moved through the clearing as if she owned it, though part of her still looked back at the cabin each time she stepped beyond its edge. Samuel kept a closer eye on her after that day. He watched how she trailed behind Koda, how she touched her nose to his shoulder for reassurance. "She's not just wild anymore," he told Mara. "She's something in between." Mara smiled softly. "A heart doesn't need a label." Late one afternoon, the hum of an unfamiliar engine drifted up the valley. Ash froze on the porch, tail flicking. Two figures emerged from a dusty SUV, a woman in an olive jacket with a clipboard, and a younger man carrying a camera. The smell of metal and strangers filled the air. Dr. Laura Quinn introduced herself with calm precision. "I'm from the Wildlife Conservation Center," she said. "We heard reports of a bobcat living here. May we take a look?" Samuel's jaw tightened, but Mara's hand on his arm steadied him. "She's not a danger," Mara said quietly. Ash watched them from behind the railing, her ears pinned flat. Koda stood between her and the visitors, silent but firm. Laura crouched slightly, her voice soft. "It's all right, sweetheart," she said. "I just want to understand you." The words meant nothing, but the tone carried patience. Eli lifted his camera, the lens glinting in the light. The sudden flash of reflection made Ash hiss, her back arching. Koda barked once, sharp and commanding. Eli flinched. "Sorry," he muttered. Laura waved him off, still studying the bobcat. "That reaction," she said, "isn't fear. It's protection." Samuel stepped forward, his tone steady. "She's family," he said. "She stays here." Laura met his eyes. "Mr. Reed, you've done something extraordinary, but she's still a wild animal. She deserves a chance to decide which world she belongs to." The words settled like frost between them. The next morning, Laura returned alone. She found Ash sitting at the tree line, sunlight glinting off her coat. "Let's see what your instincts say," Laura whispered, opening a small gate that led into the woods. Ash hesitated, muscles tense, the air thick with scent and memory. Koda barked softly behind her, a sound that held no command, only choice. Ash looked from the forest to him, torn between heartbeat and bloodline. For a moment, she stepped forward into the wild, vanishing into shadow. Samuel's chest tightened. Mara gripped his hand. "Let her try," she said. Hours passed. The woods stayed silent. Then, just before dusk, a rustle came from the underbrush. Ash emerged, leaves clinging to her fur, eyes bright but calm. She trotted straight to Koda and brushed against his neck. The choice was made. The wild had called, and she had answered love instead. Laura watched with quiet awe. "I guess that settles it," she murmured. "She's not lost. She's home." She packed her gear, leaving behind a faint smile and a promise to keep their secret. The Reeds stood together as the truck disappeared down the road, hearts lighter than they'd been in months. That night, Ash sat beside Koda under a sky of stars. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a chorus of true bobcats cried into the dark. Ash listened, ears twitching, but she didn't move. She pressed closer to Koda and purred, low and steady. Between two worlds, she had found her own. The wind carried the smell first, sharp, smoky, unnatural. Ash lifted her head from the porch rail, nostrils flaring. Across the ridge, the horizon glowed faintly orange. Koda barked once, uneasy. The forest, usually full of sound, had gone silent as if holding its breath. By noon, the sky dimmed to copper. Samuel stood outside with binoculars, jaw tight. "It's heading this way," he said. Mara began packing a small bag, her hands shaking. Ash paced along the fence, tail twitching, her instincts screaming danger. She could smell fear now, thick and human. The Reeds loaded their truck while Koda whined at the door. "We'll be back once it's safe," Samuel promised. But the words felt empty. Ash lingered on the porch, eyes fixed on the forest that had once saved her. Smoke drifted closer, curling like ghosts through the pines. A sudden crack split the air, a burning branch collapsing somewhere behind the cabin. Ash darted toward the sound, ignoring Mara's cry. Koda bounded after her, his bark swallowed by the wind. Within seconds, the trees were alive with sparks that leapt from trunk to trunk. Flames roared up the slope, devouring dry grass and pine needles. Ash darted between stumps, searching for an escape. The world turned red and gold and unbearable. Koda found her cornered against a fallen log, his fur singed, eyes fierce. He barked once, commanding her to move. A beam fell, blocking the way back. The fire hissed and twisted, trapping them inside a circle of heat. Koda lunged, pushing the log with his shoulder until it shifted. Ash squeezed through first, coughing, then turned to see him pinned by a burning branch. Her cry was swallowed by the fire. Smoke stung her eyes, but she didn't run. She darted back, claws scrabbling at the debris. The heat seared her fur, but she kept digging, pushing, pulling, until Koda dragged himself free. Together they stumbled toward the riverbed, where the air turned cooler, heavy with ash. They collapsed beside the stream, panting, their bodies streaked with soot. Ash pressed her head against Koda's neck, trembling. He licked her ear once, a slow, deliberate motion. Behind them, the fire raged louder, consuming the forest that had once taught them how to live. Hours later, rain began to fall. A thin, mercy-filled drizzle. It hissed on the smouldering earth, turning the world to steam. Samuel and Mara found them near dawn, curled together under a blackened tree. Ash lifted her head weakly, eyes wide and shining like molten gold. Samuel knelt, voice breaking. "You stubborn creatures," he whispered. Koda barely moved, exhausted but alive. Mara wrapped a blanket over both of them. The smell of smoke clung to their fur, but beneath it was something stronger, the scent of survival, of love forged in fire. Back at the cabin, the air was heavy with quiet. Ash refused to leave Koda's side. When he coughed, she purred louder. When he slept, she watched the window for flickers of light. The flames had stolen their forest, but not their bond, that nothing on earth could burn away. Outside, the valley smouldered under a grey dawn. Charred branches reached toward the sky like broken hands. Ash stepped to the threshold and looked out, her fur damp, her body scarred. She had faced the wild, the fire, and fear itself, and chosen love over all of it. Ash awoke to the smell of medicine and damp wood. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Outside, rain still dripped from the eaves, a faint echo of the storm that had nearly destroyed everything. She lifted her head and saw Koda lying on a blanket near the fire, his breathing shallow. Mara moved softly through the room, whispering words that carried both relief and worry. Samuel sat beside the husky, stroking the dog's head with a hand that trembled. "He's tough," he said. "He'll pull through." But Ash could feel the change in the air, the heavy stillness of pain. Koda's fur had lost its shine, and a faint cough shook his body every few breaths. When Samuel left the room, Ash crept closer, pressing her face to his chest. The slow, irregular rhythm beneath her ear frightened her more than the fire ever had. Days passed in a hushed rhythm. Mara mixed herbs and broth, coaxing Koda to eat. Samuel built a ramp outside so he could reach the porch without climbing. Ash followed every movement, guarding the house like a small, fierce shadow. The silence had become part of her heartbeat. Sometimes, at dusk, Koda tried to rise. Ash would meow softly and nudge his muzzle until he settled again. Her instincts told her to hunt, to roam, yet she stayed. The world beyond the cabin no longer mattered. Her father was here, and he needed her warmth more than she needed freedom. One evening, Samuel sat by the fire, rubbing his tired eyes. "You think he knows?" he asked. Mara paused from her knitting. "Animals always know," she said quietly. "They just love us anyway." Ash listened from the floor, her tail curled tight, understanding more than words could explain. Night came heavy and cold. Koda's breathing grew uneven, his blue eyes dim with fatigue. Ash climbed onto his blanket, curling against him. The heat between them was faint, fading, but she pressed closer. She began to purr, a deep, steady sound that filled the empty corners of the room. The next morning dawned grey. Samuel found them like that ash wrapped around Koda's still body, her golden eyes wide and dry. He sank to his knees, whispering her name, but the bobcat didn't move. Only when Mara touched her gently did she lift her head and let out a low, broken sound. They buried Koda beneath the old oak behind the cabin, the same tree where he'd once watched sunsets with Ash at his feet. Ash stayed beside the mound for hours, rain soaking her fur. When Samuel tried to call her back, she refused, her eyes fixed on the quiet earth. That night, the cabin was colder than ever. The hearth crackled, but its warmth felt hollow. Ash wandered from room to room, pausing where Koda used to sleep, where he used to wait by the door. She settled finally beside his empty dish, curling into a tight ball of silence. Days blurred into one another. She stopped eating for a time, hunting only when hunger forced her. Sometimes Samuel found her at the window, watching the oak. "She's grieving," Mara whispered, "just like us." And Samuel, voice rough, answered, "She's doing it better than I am." As spring returned, the grass around the oak grew bright and green. Ash visited it each morning, touching her nose to the bark before returning to the porch. Her grief had softened into something quieter, deeper. Koda was gone, but she still heard him in the wind, steady, faithful, never truly silent. The seasons turned softly over the valley. The ash from the fire had long faded into the soil, feeding new grass beneath the old oak. Each morning, Ash returned to that place, her fur brushed with dew, her golden eyes reflecting the quiet peace she had fought to earn. She no longer cried, but sometimes she made a sound, a low, breathy mew that rose and faded like wind through leaves. It wasn't sadness, not anymore. It was remembrance, a way of calling out to a presence she could still feel beside her whenever the air turned cold. Mara often watched from the porch, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "She talks to him," she would whisper. Samuel would nod without speaking. They had learned to let silence hold meaning, just as Ash had learned to live between two worlds, one seen, one forever gone. One afternoon, a young fox crossed the clearing, bold and curious. Ash didn't chase it away. She simply stood, tail twitching, and studied the creature. When it darted off toward the trees, she followed a few steps, testing the call of instinct before turning back to the house. She was still wild, but different now, quieter, wiser. The lessons Koda had taught her had taken root in her heart. She guarded the cabin, not with claws, but with patience. Sometimes she sat for hours near the window, her reflection merging with the sky beyond. Rain returned one evening, gentle and silver. Ash curled on the porch rail, eyes half closed. In the rhythm of the drops, she thought she heard Koda's old bark faint, like an echo wrapped in distance. Her ears twitched, and for a moment her purr rumbled back in answer. When Dr. Laura Quinn visited again that spring, she found Ash stronger than ever. "She's thriving," Laura said, smiling. "You've given her what nature never could belonging." Samuel only nodded. "Maybe she gave us the same." Ash rubbed her cheek against his leg before slipping away into the grass. The forest had begun to heal too. New shoots broke through the blackened ground, and birds returned with song. Ash followed their voices, climbing rocks and weaving through saplings. In her steps was a rhythm both human and wild, a balance of trust and freedom. One dawn, the cry of a strange animal echoed from the ridge. Ash's ears perked. It wasn't Koda's bark, but something young, clumsy, almost familiar. She followed the sound to the edge of the clearing, where a stray puppy stood trembling, lost and hungry. The pup looked up at her, whimpering. Ash lowered her head, curious. The smell was new, small, harmless. When it tried to step closer, she didn't hiss. Instead, she circled once and sat beside it, their bodies nearly touching. The world had shifted again this time. She was the protector. Later that day, Samuel found them both sleeping under the oak. The sight made him smile through tears. "Looks like she's paying it forward," he said softly. Mara knelt beside him, nodding. Maybe Koda sent the little one to her. Ash stirred, tail flicking against the grass. That night, as the moon rose over the valley, Ash lifted her head and let out a sound that was neither meow nor howl, but something between a note that carried across the hills. It was an echo of love, of loss, of life beginning again, and the valley listened, still and full of peace. The valley had changed once more. Green rolled across the hills, where fire had once burned black. Beneath the oak tree, wild flowers bloomed, bright against the dark soil. Ash visited every morning, her paws leaving soft prints in the earth that time itself seemed unwilling to erase. Samuel carved a small stone marker by hand, setting it at the base of the oak. The letters were simple: Koda the dog who loved a bobcat like his own. When the chisel fell silent, Ash brushed against his leg, as if thanking him for giving shape to memory. Mara often joined her at dusk. She'd sit quietly on the porch, while Ash wandered the yard, tail flicking, head bowed as if listening. Sometimes the bobcat would stop, turn toward the wind, and lift her face to the fading light, her eyes glimmering with something almost human. The puppy she had found by the ridge had grown into a spirited young dog. He followed Ash everywhere, tripping over his own paws, eager to play. She tolerated him with patience that surprised even Samuel. "She's teaching him," he said, just like Koda taught her. At night, the two could be seen together, under the stars, Ash regal and calm, the pup restless beside her. When a coyote howled from the far ridge, the pup barked clumsily, startled. Ash didn't flinch. She simply looked up at the moon and let out a low, haunting call of her own. The sound carried across the valley, weaving through pines and fields, echoing off the mountain stones. It wasn't quite a howl and not quite a growl. It was both, a perfect harmony between wild and gentle. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to pause and listen. One evening, Dr. Laura Quinn returned to visit. She stood by the oak, tracing Koda's name with her fingers. "She's thriving," she whispered to Samuel, "and so is everything she's touched." Ash watched from a distance, calm and proud, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight of memory. As summer waned, Samuel grew slower, his beard whiter, his steps measured. But each dawn, when he opened the door, Ash was there, waiting. She would greet him with a slow blink, the kind that spoke without sound. To him, it always felt like Koda's spirit saying good morning. One cold morning, frost glazed the porch. The young dog bounded ahead, while Ash stayed behind, sitting by the oak. Samuel watched her from the window, understanding what she saw: the stillness, the peace, the weight of love that never truly ends. When twilight fell that day, a soft breeze swept down the valley. Ash lifted her head, eyes half closed, and gave one long, perfect howl. It rose like a prayer, full of warmth and memory, filling the valley where she and Koda had once walked side by side. The next dawn came clear and gold. The bobcat sat by the oak with the young dog pressed against her side. Together they watched the sunrise spill over the ridge. Samuel whispered through the window. He thought the husky was his dad and he never left his side. And as the lights spread across the valley, a single hawk circled high above, its cry echoing faintly in the sky. Ash tilted her head to listen, her eyes calm and bright. The world was quiet again, but not empty, just full of love that refused to fade. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.